Suddenly there they were, just ahead in the clearing. Two teenage creeps sitting in the back of a pickup truck. One guy had a blonde ponytail. The other one wore a baseball cap. They were 100 yards away, like being all the way down a football field, but my eagle eyes were so good I could count their eyelashes. Wait a minute. Blonde ponytail? Baseball cap? Oh dear God. Forget the Yerks! We have seen the face of the true enemy! Run while you still can! So our book opens with the 5 Animorphs taking flying lessons from Tobias. Jake is a falcon, Rachel is an eagle, and Cassie and Marco are both sharing an identical osprey morph. It's kind of like when a toy line for a really awesome franchise comes out, and you go to Walmart to pick a few of them up, only to discover that all the Optimus Primes and Megatrons are sold out, and all that's left are a dozen figures of Power Glide, and nobody gives a fuck about Power Glide, but you're already set to buy one of these things and you can't show up to school without one. Ospreys are the Power Glide of the birds of prey. The Animorphs enjoy themselves, but things are broken up by 2 drunk assholes taking potshots at the wildlife. Instead of flying away out of their range, the Animorphs decide to mess with them. They fly straight at them and end up stealing their gun. This is the first of what will be known as opening chapter hijinks, in which the first couple of chapters had the Animorphs doing something that was completely unrelated to the rest of the book. This lasted until the books got into the double digits, and some of them were pretty good, but mostly they involved the Animorphs acting stupid in some manner. This one kind of qualifies for both, as it was pretty stupid for the Animorphs to attack these guys, but this is still so early in the series that they can be forgiven for not knowing what their limits should be. The Animorphs fly into an empty church and demorph. Well, except Tobias, of course. This book takes place roughly a week after the first one, and you'd think Tobias would start to be going a bit stir-crazy for having been in the body of a hawk this long, but we'll later learn that he's keeping things bottled up pretty tight. You see, it's good PR to follow a boy-narrated book with a girl-narrated book, so sorry Tobias, but you're gonna have to play second fiddle to Rachel's story. Screw your mental well-being, we have a gymnastics class to get to. The Animorphs talk over their situation. Jake has discovered that the entrance of the Yerk pool in the school has been sealed off, and they realize that if they focus their efforts exclusively on saving Tom, it would make the Yerk suspicious. Visor 3 handed them the perfect cover on a silver platter, that of being Andalite bandits, and they'll want to keep that up as long as possible. That leaves Vice Principal Chapman as their only lead, and their only connection to Chapman is through his daughter Melissa, whom Rachel used to be friends with until Melissa started to act distant. Rachel approaches Melissa at gymnastics class, but can't seem to connect with her. Rachel walks home from class alone, but some punk stops her on the street, clearly looking for the wrong kind of trouble. Rachel makes a dash for it, but the man gives chase, and Rachel is forced to halfway morph to elephant in front of him to scare him off. She just manages to demorph in time when Chapman pulls up and offers her a lift. Rachel accepts to keep face, but is clearly freaked out as she sits in the back seat of a known controller's car. Melissa was in front with her father. I sat in the back. I tried not to shiver. I tried not to stare at the back of Chapman's head. That's how it is when you're around a controller. You know that evil slug is right there in the controller's head, attached to all his nerve endings, controlling the human brain, dominating it. It's hard not to stare when you think of what is squeezed inside that skull. Now, this moment is still pretty great, but it's also another one of those moments that functions so much better in the context of the 1990s, and that was the public image of dangerous people. Around the time this book was published, police managed to catch Ted Kaczynski, the infamous Unabomber, an anarchist extremist who sent out mail bombs between 1978 to 1995, mostly to convince media outlets to publish his manifesto. A recluse who lived in a cabin for over 20 years without electricity and water, his mugshot after his arrest in 1996 was that of a bearded mountain man, and it was easy to pin the crazy label on him. He was the latest in a line of figures that the mass media identified as dangerous because of their insanities were easy to determine and their actions were indefensible. These were the kinds of crazy folk people had in mind with the creation of things like Neighborhood Watch, America's Most Wanted, teaching kids stranger danger, things like that. It was believed that dangerous people were easy to identify, and the guy who approached Rachel on the street is one of those kinds of people. You can tell right away that this guy is up to no good and means Rachel physical harm. Probably goes so far as to rape her. And this man is not a controller. The Yerks have no use for obvious creeps and crazy people. They would never infest Kaczynski or anyone else who would bring attention to themselves with such extreme behavior. Instead, they infest Tom, an upstanding student, high school basketball athlete, and spokesperson for the local youth group, and Vice Principal Chapman, a father and all-around pleasant guy. And that's where the Yerk's real power comes from, and why Rachel is far more scared of Chapman than she is of the man who almost raped her. However, this whole thing loses a bit of its power in a modern context, when 9/11 made people scared of any brown-skinned person, regardless of background, and Dateline made people believe that any adult male could be a pedophile. While in the 90s people were scared of those showing very specific tells of their mental instability, the people in the 2000s were scared of swaths of people as wide as Middle Easterners and men over the age of 18. More people were scared of more people, and that took away some of the punch of the Yerks could be anyone when everyone's scared of everyone. So Rachel ends up telling the rest of the Animorphs about this encounter, and Jake and Marco chew her out for possibly revealing her identity. Well, after all, everyone is totally going to believe this guy about the elephant girl he almost raped. And this makes Jake and Marco a hypocrite. I'm sorry, but who is more likely to be going around telling people their stories? A near rapist who saw something impossible, or two kids who saw something improbable? Okay, yes, Rachel could have handled the situation better. She admits as much. But she was cornered and scared and is a 13-year-old girl. All the Animorphs had to do with dealing with the kids with the gun was fly away. But instead they decided to make a show of it that these guys have most likely recounted to all their friends by now. Is this book seriously saying that doing stupid animal tricks for no reason is more justified than trying to protect yourself from rape? Anyway, the Animorphs decide that they need to do some spy work, and the best way to do that is to morph Melissa's cat, Fluffer McKitty. This proves to be a much tougher task than you'd think, because when they try to corner the cat that night, it attacks them and makes a dash up a tree. Yes, our military operation against a secret alien invasion has just been postponed because a cat is stuck up in a tree. Oh Lord, we're screwed. Imagine if Hitler won the war because the American forces realized they left the faucet running and had to turn the fleet around. Tobias scoops up a shrew, which Rachel morphs to try and lure Fluffer out. I guess morphing a ball of yarn was out of the question. The shrew's skittery instincts freak Rachel out, but the lure works and Rachel morphs Fluffer. In this early part of the series, Kay Applegate was still filling things out, and one such thing was how to write in the animal's instincts, and in these early books, she didn't always have that down. I heard a sound coming from somewhere. It was a sound that reminded me of my mother. It reminded me of both my mothers, the human mother and the cat who had licked my fur and carried me around in her mouth. Now, that's not instincts, that's straight up cat memories. There was a bit of this in the first book too, when Jake morphed Homer, gave into the dog's instincts, and could immediately identify his territory and could identify smells and all that. But this one's worse than that, because you can hand-wave that away as Jake recognizing his own scent. There's no way Rachel has cat memories. Cats aren't howlers. This goes against everything about morphing. And yet, it's not fixed in the reprint. Oh, but they changed Cassie from saying, take a pill, to her saying, chill out, girl. Good to see they have their priorities straight. So, morphed as Fluffer McKitty, Rachel sneaks into Chapman's house. Mr. and Mrs. Chapman switch to acting robotically whenever Melissa isn't there, like they're on autopilot. 3 minutes to 8, Chapman gets up and makes for the basement, where Rachel discovers he keeps a holographic communicator. Chapman contacts Visitor 3, who berates him for not finding the Analyte bandits. And I have to wonder what qualifies Chapman for that specific task. Isn't he busy most of the week doing school stuff? Where the hell does he find the time to run an Andalite investigation team? Visitor 3 brings up that if something called the Council of 13 learned about the presence of Andalites after Visitor 3 had reported that the Andalites around Earth had been destroyed, there would be an inquiry. It's then that Visitor 3 spots Rachel and orders that the cat be destroyed. "Kill it," Visitor 3 said. "What better form for an Andalite to use? Better kill it, just to be safe." "Yes, Visitor," Chapman said. Only what?" the Visitor snapped. "It belongs to the girl. If I kill the animal, she'll be angry. She may draw attention. Killing a cat is seen as a bad deed. It would violate my cover." Visitor 3 did not look happy to be disobeyed, but he was not a creature who made impetuous decisions. Oh, I needed a good laugh. Impetuous Decisions is Visitor 3's nickname, yo. So we learn Melissa is not a controller. Visitor 3 concludes the discussion by morphing a predator from the Yeerk homeworld and threatens to suck the Yeerk straight out of Chapman's head should he fail. To drive the point home, he shows Chapman video of him doing just that on a high-ranking Yeerk that failed him. "He made impetuous decisions. He must be destroyed." The conversation ends and Mr. Chapman returns to Mrs. Chapman, and we get our first little bit of glimpse that not all is right within the Yeerk forces when both Chapmans agree that, while the high-ranking Yeerk deserved to be punished for whatever off-screen thing it did, Visitor 3 methods were way too harsh. Melissa comes down and asks for some help with her homework, but the controllers just brush her off. Rachel goes upstairs to comfort her in that way cats only do in fiction. Rachel leaves and tells the Animorphs everything she saw, except for the part about Visitor 3 wanting the cat destroyed. After stewing over it for a bit, they decide they need more info, namely information on the Kandrona machine that makes the rays that the Yeerks feast on. So a few days later, they regroup again outside Chapman's house, though Jake is mysteriously absent. Rachel morphs Fluffer again and sneaks back into the house, but before she can get into the basement, Jake startles her by revealing he's morphed a flea and is now on Rachel's back. Rachel almost blows her cover, but manages to make it into the secret hologram room. "Fool!" Visitor's artificial voice was flat, but still carried a load of anger. "Do I care about a handful of hosts? What have you learned of the Andalite bandits?" "Visitor, what can I do? Unless they show themselves." "They used Earth animals in the attacks on the pool," Visitor 3 said. "They used powerful, dangerous Earth animals. Find out how they obtained such morphs. My experts here tell me that such animals are rare on this part of the planet." "Yes, 'cause it's not possible that humans gathered these animals into one place for our entertainment. And if it were possible, there's clearly no such place like that here, or I would have heard of it." Has Visitor 3 ever looked at a single map of the city he's decided to base the Earth invasion from? Anyway, Chapman accidentally kicks Rachel, and Visitor 3 puts 2 and 2 together, realizing that the cat is an Andalite spy. Visitor 3 demands that Chapman bring both the cat and Melissa to him. There's a bit of a tussle as Rachel claws the shit out of Chapman's arm, and that's when Mr. and Mrs. Chapman's hosts start rebelling. Mr. Chapman starts acting like he's having a seizure, while one of Mrs. Chapman's hands seems to gain a life of its own, Evil Dead 2 style. Eventually, Chapman gets everything under control, but doesn't take Melissa. Chapman drives the captured Rachel with Jake in tow to the construction site, which I guess is now an official Yeerk meeting place. It's not like we have an underground lair we could hook up in, oh no. Visitor 3 shows up with a handful of ships and demands to know why Chapman didn't bring Melissa. And Chapman, the real Chapman, takes control. It turns out that Mr. and Mrs. Chapman voluntarily became controllers on the grounds that Melissa be spared. Chapman then reveals his leverage. Chapman is getting fairly skilled at briefly gaining a little control, so that if the Yeerks take Melissa, Chapman will attempt to gain control in a public function, and try to blow the Yeerks' cover. If Visitor 3 really wants Melissa, he'll either have to risk this, or destroy Chapman, which is just way too much effort for a small girl of no importance. Visitor 3 agrees, and Chapman wins this round. The Yeerk regains control and leaves, while Visitor 3 turns his attention to Rachel. However, Marco and Cassie manage to reach the construction site, where they start a bulldozer. This creates enough of a distraction for Jake to morph Tiger and for Rachel to escape. That's when the Animorphs start another bulldozer, which crashes into a bug fighter, causing it to explode. Book, could we talk for a moment? I was really getting into you. I was pretty invested in Rachel's plight and was really wondering how she would get out of this. And then you did this. Why on earth would you do this? First off, exactly what kind of threat do bulldozers have against alien warships? I could have bought that the Yeerks were unfamiliar with bulldozers and thus they would have made a functional distraction, that the unknown threat would cause enough confusion for the Animorphs to escape, but then one of the bulldozers touched one of the Yeerk ships and caused it to explode. These things are designed for constant space combat. They are meant to take laser shots, to handle the pressures of space in exiting and entering atmospheres. Are you suggesting that not only could this hunk of steel moving 5 miles per hour damage a bug fighter, but cause it to explode? And even if I bought that, how in the name of fuck did the Animorphs manage to start not one, but 2 bulldozers? Did these kids really have the great fortune to stumble on 2 different bulldozers that have been sitting there for months that both happen to have the keys in the ignition? Or does Marco have hot wiring skills that have never been mentioned before and will never be mentioned again? The least you could do is show us how the Yeerks cover up this explosion, especially this soon after they had to cover up Elfangor's ship landing. I'm sorry, but the logic fuck of the scene really releases a lot of the air in the book's tires. So, after the Animorphs escape, Rachel writes Melissa a note that makes her feel good for like an hour, and like my enthusiasm, the book just kinda peters out. Post-book follow-up. This book has some marked improvements over the first. Now that we've had all the really important exposition out of the way, we can slow down and focus on smaller missions and deeper characterization. It doesn't feel nearly as rushed. The Animorphs themselves have toned down their approach. They're more likely to make plans instead of rush headfirst into danger. They do spying and intel missions, they practice morphing, they actively avoid combat, and they spend more time talking out the details. Still, while the Animorphs are acting smarter than they once were, they're still pretty stupid. They almost failed their mission because the cat got stuck up in a tree. The hypocrisy concerning the matter of Rachel almost being raped is one of my biggest pet peeves throughout the entire series, as every time the Animorphs do something stupid and use their powers irresponsibly, nobody's chewed out nearly as heavily as Rachel for having stopped a rapist. Jake really doesn't have all his priorities straight. Between this and morphing Flea without telling anyone shows he hasn't quite found his feet as the team leader yet. These are strikes against the characters, but that doesn't automatically translate to strikes against the book, though it is really frustrating. These kids are still growing into their roles, and they're doing it at a pretty realistic pace. The book has strong themes concerning family, which becomes something of a cornerstone for the series. We have the broken household of the Chapmans that remind the Animorphs of the strong bonds they have with their own families, Tobias excluded, of course. For pretty much everyone in the world, humanity is a very abstract concept. 7 billion people in the world is an impossible number for one's brain to process. So while the Animorphs know in some vague way that they're trying to protect humanity, it's really their real, tangible families that they're fighting for. We get our first good look at Rachel's family. Her parents are divorced, her mother's a lawyer, and her father's a news anchor. She has 2 younger siblings that she shares a very strong bond with. Despite the better pacing and some pretty good scenes, the book still has its issues. In terms of character development, it's almost a reverse of the last book. While number 1, The Invasion, developed everyone but the narrator, this one does a good job focusing on Rachel at the expense of everyone else. All the other Animorphs feel like background characters to Rachel's story. I mean, right now, Tobias is in the middle of an intense trauma, but we have to save that for the next time because the series has to follow a set order of narrators. That wouldn't be too bad if Rachel was interesting enough to carry the book. And while it's okay, it's really not enough really happens to her for us to focus on. Sadly, the ending in the construction site is a complete wipeout. Overall, the book comes off as a slight improvement from the last one, but we still have a ways to go before Kay Applegate brought the series to the level of quality that it's known for. I give number 2, The Visitor, a 6 out of 10.
And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, the little boy blue and the man on the moon. son, I don't know when, but we'll get together then, Dad. We're gonna have a good time then.